everyone. My name is Sarah Cannon, and I am the author of two books. The first one is called Oddity, and it's about a brave girl, Ada, who has to solve mysteries in her very strange town in order to find out what happened to her twin sister. And my most recent book is Twist. This is a fantasy novel that's set in 1983, in which a bunch of friendly creatures have moved into one of the main characters' art sketchbook, and a bunch of monsters from another main character's scary stories are hunting the friendly creatures. And when they all come blasting out of the notebook into a neighborhood there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the city I lived in when I was in middle school, all three of these main characters have to figure out how to overcome these monsters and protect their homes and their families together. So today I thought I would read you the first chapter of Twist so that you can hear a little bit more about what it's about. And I'm just warning you, I like to write spooky books. I'm actually a member of a group called SpookyMiddleGrade.com, and we all like spooky stories. So if you are easily spooked, maybe find a blanket to hide under now. Okay, Chapter 1, Bushwhacked. It was a green and stormy night. Tornado season in Oklahoma was like that. People with common sense had already gotten where they were supposed to be. A closet or a bathtub. Any room with no windows was good, unless you lived in a trailer, and then it was better to leave completely. Just another day in Tornado Alley. But tonight, the weather had caught Michelle at the worst possible time. She was already riding her banana seat bike home from Dana's when she realized the sky wasn't just darkening. It was going green. That was a bad sign. Then she realized the clouds had dropped down to form a long wall across the sky. That was even worse. She still could have been okay, except she took the back way home. The path cut across a field, but kids had been using it for years, so there was a smooth, dusty track worn by the ghosts of other bike tires. Someone had been on it just a few minutes ago, because in the glow of her bike light, Michelle could see dust floating above the path ahead of her. Even though she had glasses on, she blinked, like the particles were going to get in her eyes. The sudden howl of an animal shocked her, and she swerved. Her bike light flickered as she hit a chuck hole, a big one that hadn't been there last time she'd taken this path. The beaded hair ties at the ends of her long red braids bounced against her back. "Whoa!" she said out loud to no one, squeezing her brakes. Then she hit another hole and almost flipped her bike. She rode right off the path, wading to a stop in the tall grass. She wheeled her bike around so she could use her light to see. Right in the middle of the path was a huge paw print. Something growled, much closer than the howl had been. Lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled way too quickly for comfort. On the other side of the path, something enormous moved through the grass. It was louder than the rush of the storm, and Michelle thought she saw the tips of bristling fur before the glare of lightning washed across her glasses and blinded her. Back on her bike, pedaling as fast as she could, Michelle tried to quiet her breathing so she could listen to the thing that was following her. She could hear the panting of the beast and the crashing of its body through the grass as it chased her. Then it was on the path, and its paws were silent, but its breathing was getting closer. Above them, the storm clouds rolled across the Oklahoma sky. Michelle was in the home stretch now. She could see the lights of her street in the distance. But she was also on a downhill slope. Pedaling couldn't help her anymore. All she could do was hold on and steer. She jumped a bump in the path, then another. She bounced on her seat, and her glasses bounced on her nose. Then she fell. The bike skidded out from under her on the dusty path. The handlebar hit her on the knee, hard, and her glasses flew off. There wasn't any time to look for them. There wasn't even time to scream. With an echoing howl, the creature sprang. She lived, but only because the storm had confused the view enough that the monster attacked her bicycle, and not her. She pulled herself backward into the sea of grass, her hurt leg dragging on the ground. On the path, she could hear the squeal of metal and the snarls of the creature as it found a machine instead of meat. Then she heard a snort as its head swung up, fixed on her location. Quick as the lightning overhead, she rolled over and dragged herself to her feet. She limped down the hill toward a drainage ditch as enormous raindrops began to splatter all around her. Lightning flashed, and the thunder was deafening. She slipped and fell again, this time tumbling downhill into the water at the bottom of the ditch. The rain was blinding. She got up onto her hands and knees as best she could. She started to head up the hill toward the tall wooden fence that enclosed her yard. There was no gate on the back, but she could scream for help, and maybe someone would hear her. Then an enormous dark shadow crossed in front of her. Michelle made for the concrete arch that separated the ditch from the cow pasture. The water in the ditch was rising as the rain ran downhill across the hard-baked summer dirt instead of soaking in. Water got up her nose, and she choked but kept going. She didn't look behind her. She could hear splashing, panting, grunting, but she was too afraid to look or think or stop. She half swam across the archway, no longer afraid of the water moccasins her parents had told her 1,000,000 times were in here and could kill her. Then she hit the other side, and her fingers found wire instead of freedom. The farmer had run fence across the arch. She turned to go out the way she'd come in, but it was already too late. The creature loomed across the entry. A flash of lightning illuminated its hairy bulk, and she realized it had one great paw up on top of the arch and was leaning down to look in at her, its posture like a person's. Lightning flashed and its sharp teeth gleamed. Without her glasses, she couldn't be sure, but she thought it smiled. Then it moved. She dodged, but she was a mouse in a trap. There was nowhere to go. Outside the arch, every animal in earshot made itself smaller as the monster pounced. Michelle screamed and she screamed, and then she didn't. The monster's howl echoed across the neighborhood, amplified by the concrete arch. Michelle's neighbors cowered in their closets, fearing tornadoes more than anything, and being completely wrong. As Eli Goodman finished reading, his teacher, Mrs. Benton, clutched her heart. He guessed she hadn't expected him to be quite so bloodthirsty. Maybe she didn't read a lot of scary stories. The first character who saw the monster never got to live. Everybody knew that. A few kids said, "Whoa," softly. One or two even clapped. It would have been enough to make him want to try that new moonwalk move of Michael Jackson's, except that Scott Gabler was looking around like he smelled something his dog had delivered. He smirked at Eli as his crony, Brandon, muttered in his ear. Eli looked away, but he could still hear them laugh. "So," said Mrs. Benton, widening her eyes at the class as if to say, wasn't that something? Who has questions about the Howler? Adriana raised her hand. Do you write stories like that a lot? I write screenplays, too. You mean movies like E.T.? More like the Twilight Zone movie, but yeah. So you want to work in Hollywood when you grow up? Asked Scott. It might have been a reasonable question without the smirk. That's the idea. That's like a lofty goal. Not that many people get to work in Hollywood, right? Eli'd heard enough. So you're saying if something is difficult, I should give up? He asked. Scott wasn't used to being challenged. He twitched. Eli thought Scott looked just like a jackrabbit, but if he wrote that into his story, it would sound made up, a fact he found annoyingly unfair. I'm just saying, maybe you need a backup plan. Mrs. Benton didn't generally meddle in arguments unless someone was using fighting words. She liked to say tough questions built brain plasticity, whatever that was. Eli didn't care. He was mad. Backup plans are for people who don't believe in what they're doing, or people who aren't any good at it. What's the career outlook for people who are obsessed with computer games? Eli knew that was a direct hit. Lately, all Scott could talk about was Zork. Just as a collective ooh began to rise, Mrs. Benton cut in. You know, she said, you two have given me an interesting idea. The class, smelling trouble, got quiet fast. Let's discuss a new topic, a project. Project? Said Jay through blue lips. The boy had a bad habit of putting markers in his mouth when he was thinking. Eli would have paid good money to get him to stop, because at first glance he always thought Jay had been poisoned. It was, he guessed, the downside of being a horror writer. Yes, but the good news is that you don't have to go it alone. You'll have help. This is a group project? Asked Neha Prasad, looking up from her sketchbook. It sounded more like an ambush to Eli, and from the look on Neha's face, she agreed. Yes, said Mrs. Benton. Let's call this the Venn diagram project. Eli knew what a Venn diagram was. It was a chart made out of circles. It was supposed to show where different subjects overlapped and where they didn't. I'm going to break you into teams. Your first step will be to sit down and discuss your various interests. Then I want you to figure out where those subjects connect. What if they don't? Said Scott with a scowl. Eli pictured his and Scott's Venn diagram circles repelling each other like magnetic opposites, same as they did in real life. They will, said Mrs. Benton, with a smile designed to have the same effect as a firm hand on Scott's shoulder. In fact, I'm so confident about that if you can't come up with any commonalities yourselves, I'll sit down with your team over a lunch period and we'll brainstorm. I personally guarantee we'll find one. Scott shut his mouth. Nobody wanted to give up a lunch period, even for Mrs. B. Court Castle's hand went up next. She was leaning back in her chair like it was a rocker, her long blonde braid dangling over the back. This naturally made Eli picture her whacking her head on the floor. If he wrote it into his story, though, the floor wouldn't be carpeted. That way the thud would be louder. So, after we have this little meeting of the minds, Court drawled, what do we do next? I'll come up with a list of activities to help you explore your shared interest as a group, said Mrs. Benton. You'll complete one, document it, and present your results to the class. I hate group projects, muttered Kelly. Eli, who was still awkwardly standing by Mrs. B's desk, would have to remember how much she could hear from the front of the room. Not that he disagreed. Kelly's disgust for group projects was pretty much universal. One kid always ended up doing most of the work, and since this was the pull-out program for gifted students, everybody in Mrs. Benton's class had been that kid. Have a little faith, said Mrs. Benton, smiling at Kelly. Now, to choose the groups. You can sit down, Eli. She put her hands on her hips and gave the class a good once-over. Then she started rattling off names. Eli waited, and sure enough, Group 5 will be Neha, Eli, Court, and Scott. Eli rubbed one dark-skinned hand across his close-cropped hair, then shook his head. Like he'd figured, it was an ambush, a setup to make him and Scott appreciate each other. Scott was like a piece of gum on hot Oklahoma pavement, and somehow Eli had gone and stepped in him. Everywhere he went, he dragged a long trail of Scott behind him. For other folks, it was free entertainment, but Eli wasn't laughing. He was sick of being stuck with that kid. So, we see a little bit of this setup. And if you take a look at the cover, you'll see this is Eli's best creation right here. And then these are some of the friendly creatures. This is Sleekit. And this is actually a dog made out of socks. He's called the Gargoyle. And then here are some of the butterfly-winged snakes that are in the book. And this is actually a giant spider. It disguises itself as a weeping willow tree, not always well. So, if this sounded entertaining to you, if you enjoyed the first chapter, I hope that you'll be on the lookout for a copy of Twist that you can call your own or borrow and read. And I hope you'll also check out my other video on the Authors Everywhere channel, which talks a little bit more about setting and how to use setting as a way to drive plot in your own stories. And there's actually a scavenger hunt questionnaire on there full of 80s trivia. And if you finish that and you email that back to me, and my email is available on that other video, and it's also just hellosarahcannon@gmail.com, then you'll be entered into a drawing to win your own signed copy of Twist, and who knows, maybe some other prizes as well. So, I'm very excited that you joined me today, and I hope you'll check out the other fun read-alouds and author videos on this channel, and, have a great day.